You've just had your first exposure to experience-led commissioning. What are you thinking about it?
And there's just so much there that we could use to captivate that patient experience, really, and the patient's perception of what their care is the reality. It doesn't matter how good we believe it to be. If it doesn't serve what patients want from it, then we're doing the wrong job. For people that are more pulled back from a commissioning process, who aren't actually working day to day as clinicians, those stories could be perhaps more powerful than they are for me, because I do see the real life patient experience as it's lived every single. I think the difference that today's meeting has had from other commissioning meetings is that set a tone of looking from real life experiences, because I think they're taking on board these broad premises and thinking, well, I know how this affected me, and I don't think there was any one of us here who didn't have a personal example, whether it was about things that I spoke about or your own experience within your family, Niti's, anybody's. We each came up with an example that was very close to our heart and perhaps very emotional for each of us, that illustrated the points we were trying to make.
Fantastic.
I'm excited about it. I was excited when I was first invited. It's the sort of thing I do. I like looking at different approaches to clinical commissioning, and certainly one of the things that I've always had as a big emphasis is about patient and public involvement and how we can best incorporate patient experiences in designing services that will meet those expectations.
I was involved in setting up, delivering and managing a cardiac rehab service in the community. And the experience was very different to what we're doing now, in that commissioners were seen as the experts, and clinicians, they should only be involved when we needed a clinical question, if you like. And so often, if services were set up, clinicians weren't involved until probably halfway along the line. So that, if you didn't have a clinical background, then you can't always anticipate in an ideal world, but be realistic about it. And vice versa, clinicians aren't aware of what it's like to commission, and so I think it's important that those barriers are broken down, and it was seen as us and them, and you don't really know, so your opinion isn't valuable. And then you wonder why services don't work. I think that the difference here is what's been really good about this morning is that we actually were working in a group, and you forget who's who. We forget who the patient is, we forget who the professional, the carer, the commissioner, because we're all saying the same things, we're all interacting, and that's a really positive experience from
the cardiac commissioning. Was there any patient involvement in that? We talked about the lack of clinical involvement. What about patient involvement?
No, it was very much, this is the agenda, we need to meet the targets for the NSFs, for instance, and we need to get this service in, this is what we want to do. And I think there was also a feeling of rivalry as well. So from the commissioning point of view, there was a project manager, there was myself, but you were only included when there was a clinical issue instead of looking at the service. So, looking back, you'd think, maybe if you didn't have those barriers, things could have worked out better. Maybe you would have shared information, and you would have had that feeling of them and us, and that mistrustfulness, and that here we go again sort of thing. Whereas for me, it just feels like it's a different way of doing things, and I feel quite excited, and I hope that this really comes off.
Brilliant. Why does it feel so different, this way of doing things today?
I think it's mutual respect. We and because we're focusing on the patient. That's what it feels like. It feels like that we're here for the patient and not for the professional, whether it's a clinician or a commissioner, and that we need to be addressing targets and all those sorts of stuff that have been going on in the past. So it feels, I feel quite excited about it.
Tell me what you thought, warts and all.
I thought it was great that the clinicians are finally, and non-clinicians, are finally talking about this piece. I felt that we had a bit of an edge to it and people were feeling a bit nervous. But I think they'll be up for it, and I think this is the start of another journey to do experience-led commissioning for other areas. It's only the start of that journey. I'm excited, a bit nervous, but generally it was mildly optimistic compared to all the dramas we've had recently. So I think that's what the difference was, and it's also because we were concentrating for the first time just talking about patients and talking about their stories rather than wretched care pathways and the money and everything. I think it's going to be different because we're going to try and hold the patient at the heart of all of this rather than we're talking just about money and commissioning. I think that's why this is going to be different.
What your impressions are of how it's gone so far?
I think it's gone really well. I wasn't really sure what to expect when I came, to be honest. You have an idea of what the things you should do or the things that actually... this idea, from the national framework, I'd have a quick look at that and say, yeah, all those things seem really good, but actually in practice, how to put it into practice. I was interested to know sort of how that process is going to happen, how people are going to try and develop the process for this, because obviously there's a lot of constraints within lots of different areas, too many really to go into. And so it kind of intrigued me to think, well, okay, I'll go along and see what's been said, and actually whether or not I can take anything personally that I can actually start to use actually in a day-to-day that I've not been using, especially into maybe not giving the best or suspicious that you're not giving the best because there's the constraints on the NHS and therefore you're not going to even offer them the best, you can offer them the cheapest, which is not always the same. Being transparent, so actually we're trying to go for cost-effective treatments that are evidence-based, that are well-trialled and actually work. As well as addressing the fact that there's a real person that's fearful they're going to die